What do you do when you're told you have stage 4 cancer? If you're Thom Barrett, you choose to live fully, intentionally, and with heart. In this inspiring episode of Journey with Jake, Thom opens up about his diagnosis, his love for the present moment, and how adventure fuels his soul. It's a powerful reminder that the most extraordinary journeys often begin in life's hardest moments. Time to embrace the cold with Thom Barrett. Welcome to Journey with Jake. This is a podcast about adventure and how through our adventures we can overcome the challenges of life that come our way. While I expect you will learn some things about different adventures, this show will entertain you. Each episode will feature a different guest or guests as they share experiences and stories from the different adventures they have been on. Not only will you be entertained, but you will also hear the failures and trials each guest faces and what they have done or are doing to overcome the hardships that come their way. My goal is to take each of us on a journey through the experiences of my guests with the hope that you'll be entertained and inspired to overcome your day-to-day challenges. After all, it's not all about the destination as it is about the journey. Welcome to Journey with Jake. I'm your host, Jake Bushman, and I'm so glad you're here. If you haven't already, be sure to follow me on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast. Subscribe on YouTube to watch the full episodes. And don't forget, Journey with Jake is part of the Podmatch Podcast Network. Check out podmatch.com/network for some other fantastic shows from independent podcasters like myself. Today's episode is with Thom Barrett, a former corporate accountant turned adventurer, storyteller, and author of powerful books like Living While Dying, Chasing My Northern Lights, and more. Thom is not only living with stage 4 cancer, he's redefining what it means to truly live. And if this conversation inspires you, you'll definitely enjoy episode 162 with Jeremy George, an incredible story of bucket list adventures and living with intention. Let's dive in with Thom Barrett. Well, this is exciting for me. I've got Thom Barrett with me, joining me today. Thom, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, this is exciting for me. I first saw some information about you and I'm like, wow, this guy's adventurous. He's out there traveling around. He's embracing the cold. I think that's the title of one of your books. I see all these pictures of you with snow in the background and just outside doing things. I'm excited to hear your story, especially about what you're going through and what you have going on in your life right now. And I'm excited to hear about that. Before we jump into all that though, Thom, just give me a little background, where you're from, where you grew up, that sort of thing.
Sure. So I'm a Cape Codder. For those who may not know that, it's on the East Coast, just south of Boston somewhat. It's a resort area. It's a big spot for beaches and stuff like that. So I grew up here and I now live here. I retired here. Love the area. I was gone for about 30 years, actually living a life working out of Boston, where I was a partner at a firm called PricewaterhouseCoopers. But my venture started actually when I started working, because the area that I focused on, 1978, were topics that were accounting and technology. And at that time, technology was not really well defined in the business world, and what we see and do today is wholly different. And so when I jumped into it in 78, I wanted to get engaged on the technology side, but I didn't know if it was going to last, right? Is this a fad? That's why I went with the accounting, because you always need accountants. You need someone to count the money. So anyhow, I went to school in Boston and worked out of Boston. Spent some time traveling around the world for work. But it was very enjoyable. I loved my job, but I also liked retiring. I retired at 55 with a purpose. No matter where I was in terms of my career, I wanted to stop at 55 because adventures, expeditions were really important to me. And I wanted to have a different lifestyle. I wanted to have a different chapter. I just didn't want to be noted as the guy that was an accountant. I wanted to know the guy that he did some weird stuff. So that's what I did. That's what I do. While I'm on the Cape, in between trips, I actually take advantage of being down here because kayaking is super here. But I'm also a wood crafter. I build furniture. It's mostly on design for other people. I get commissioned to do stuff. And that's what I do when I'm not, hitting the polar regions or down in Antarctica or wherever else I go.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. And family life, Any kids, anything like that?
Oh yeah. We just talked about that. I've got two daughters. They're in their 30s. One's on the West Coast, one's the East Coast, and they're doing quite well. One's an architect, and one's working for an accounting firm. Surprise, surprise! And they are both extremely penchant for travel. I don't know where they got that from, but maybe sometimes when you lead by example, some people follow, and certainly they have. So they're big travelers as well.
And why? Okay, you said you retired with a purpose, and the purpose was to get out there more and travel more. Why is travel so important to you?
That's a great, great question. And it's changed over time, right? It's changed over time. Before, I remember this distinctly. In 1996, I don't know if it was a midlife crisis or not, but I was 40. And I said to myself, there's something missing in my life. I mean, I wasn't complaining about it, mind you, because I had a great career, growing family. I coached them in different sports, very active. We went and did our vacations together, and it was great. I mean, I couldn't complain about that part, but there was something still missing, right? I needed to feel challenged in doing things. I mean, I certainly felt challenged at work, but I wanted to take it to a different space. I wanted to be able to use the skill sets I was acquiring from my left side and apply it to my right side. And so adventure was really a part of the right side because I could be creative in what I did. I can pursue things in using different venues to experience it, whether it's kayaking, hiking, climbing, skiing, whatever. And I also realized that in order for me to still be engaged at work, I needed to find a way to recharge my batteries. And I found that travel, and particularly, I don't want to say travel adventure. I needed to be doing something. I mean, I'm not a museum guy. I'm not going to go to Paris, go to Louvre. I'm not going to go, London and watch the Big Ben, right? I mean, I need to go someplace where there is activity associated to it. So, whether it's doing a bike tour from Czech Republic to Budapest, right? Or kayaking for 2 or 3 weeks up in the Prince William Sound. Those are things that I gravitated to. And when I was younger, to me, it was about the feats, it was about the miles, it was about the accomplishment. But now it's more about the experience, about in-depth learning something about the area. And so I found that to be very important.
So I think you kind of answered a question that I ask a lot on this podcast. I always like to ask what adventure means to you. And you kind of answered that a little bit with what you were saying. So just tell us again, for you, what does adventure mean?
Yeah. It's funny. I was on another podcast and they asked a similar question. I said, for me, adventure doesn't start until you have a problem where you're challenged to figure something out, right? Whether it's, so you could be doing a nice backcountry trip, cross country skiing, right? And, enjoying all the sights. That's not really an adventure. That's just maybe a hike or, I'm going to run for fitness. But if my boot comes apart or I end up in a steep area where there's a challenge to it, and now the adventure begins. And that's for me what the adventure is. So I want to put myself in positions or places where I'm challenged, and you've got to figure out how to overcome, how to enjoy it still, right? Because if it's a problem that takes you home, and then you haven't really done your thing. It's about overcoming it. And that's, to me, the adventure part.
I love that. I don't think I've had anyone quite say it that way before. I've had, a lot of people talk about, being out of your comfort zone, things like that. That's an interesting way to look at it. Like the adventure doesn't start until there's a problem or a challenge to overcome. I think that's a great way to look at it. And I think that's where all of our memory, our strongest memories, you talked about, now you're kind of focusing on just like the experience of things. I think that's where it comes from, are those moments.
Right. I mean, like I give one example. I'm skiing with a bunch of guys. Well, no, actually, there's three of us. We're backcountry skiing. We happen to be going from Crested Butte to Aspen, right? As a 5-day trip. We're doing a hut-to-hut kind of thing, right? And it was pretty. We were having a great time. The steeps were there. The pod was there. It was good. But it wasn't until I fell off a cliff of about 50 feet with a full backpack and landed on my face that I said, whoa, okay, now it's getting real. Now the adventure begins, right? How do I get up? How do I, figure this out? How do I, without hurting yourself, get on to the next point? And I have all kinds of examples where things go wrong, but I'm alive to talk about them. So that's what it's about.
I love it. Speaking of being alive, I think one of the biggest challenges you are facing is a cancer diagnosis that you have. Tell me about that. Can you take me back to the moment when you kind of first received it and kind of what's going on with you with that?
Well, it's funny, Jake. I think I was diagnosed in 2015, my first diagnosis, and I really didn't think too much about it, right? Because I've had cancer before. I had colon cancer and I had skin cancer, and the approach by the docs then was remove it, right? Okay, you got you got some cancer in the colon, let's remove it. You got some skin cancer, let's remove it, and it never came back. I said, okay, well, we'll just remove the prostate, and I figured I'd be okay. And I was for a couple of years, and right after that, right in 2016, I decided that I wanted to become a ski bum. So I built myself a camper, throw it in the back of my truck, and lived out of that for 3 or 4 months at a time. And have got Max Pass or a Icon Pass or wherever the ski passes are today, and then just went west and followed the snow. And I did that for 4 years, and it was lovely. But unfortunately, in 2019, when I came back from one of my trips, I wasn't feeling very well, so I went back to the docs, and the cancer had come back. So I had to go through a whole host of radiation treatments, etc. That pretty much took 4 months of treatments to get through. And then when I finished up with that, 2019, I said, well, we're going to, I started to ski again, but that's when COVID came about. And I had to stay home. But in 2020, I decided, well, I'm going to go back on the road again. And instead of leaving for only 2 or 3 months, I left for 6 months. But it wasn't until 2024 that I was actually diagnosed with stage 4. That was difficult. It was like someone had socked me in the stomach, right? Because like up to this point, I could manage the cancer, right? I could still take treatments, and there was a chance of fighting it. But when you hit stage 4, it's terminal. So it's no like, there's no more I can do about it. I now have to learn how to live with it. And it has been a challenge, because there are days, like we had this podcast a few weeks ago, and I couldn't make it because it was just one of those bad days where the nausea and fatigue were just too much. And that's also when I started to change my mindset about travel, where the experience, the immersion were more important, because I couldn't carry the backpack anymore. I couldn't, push myself like I used to. And so I had to think about how I could take even more out of that trip, and going slower, believe it or not, accomplish that. Right. And I've got lots of stories where, for instance, anyway, so since 2024, I have kayaked off the coast of Antarctica. I've hiked Patagonia in terms of both Argentina and Chile. I was in Bolivia in terms of hitting the high roads up there in terms of the deserts. And then last month, or 2 months ago, I was in Scotland, not so much to do the Highlands, but I did a kayaking tour around the islands of Scotland. It was most amazing. And then next month, I'm heading to Iceland and Greenland, and then taking a trip up to the Northwest Passage.
All of this with stage 4 cancer, terminal cancer, basically.
Yep.
What do you do? How do you manage the parts where, like you said, you and I were supposed to talk a week or so ago, and you weren't feeling good. You couldn't do it. How do you manage the travel when that happens? Because I know that's got to happen while you travel. You got to have plans. You got to be prepared for certain things that come up. How does that all play into it for you?
So I'm a planner. I like to plan. And so for me, back in the day, when I would go off on my 2 or 3 week trips solo, backcountry, and I usually do this in the wintertime. I don't like the summer in terms of it's too hot. I want to be in the beach. I don't want to be hiking in some mountain. But that to me is a big deal. And so now with the cancer part, I got to make certain I've dealt with all the things I need to your questions, right? So there's just one more thing I have to add to the planning. Now, one thing I didn't have in my planning, but we'll have it going forward. So when I was in Bolivia, I did stage 4, and I didn't think too much about what it meant to be in Bolivia, right? I mean, I just thought it was a beautiful area, and I was going to do all kinds of activities. So we were in the desert, and we were at 18,000 feet, and I didn't only suffer AMS, altitude sickness. I had HAPE, right? So I started having a pulmonary edema. I had fluid starting to build up in my lungs. And the question I never asked my guides were, what's your medical, what's your medical awareness? And what do you have for medical devices like oxygen? I mean, at that height, that's a possibility, right? I didn't ask them that question, and come to find out they had they didn't have any kind of skill sets on medical. And thankfully, I'm a wilderness first aid responder, so I can deal with it. But they didn't have oxygen, and that's what I needed, because I didn't realize that I was at 72% to 76% in terms of my oxygen intake. And normally, well, you need to be if you're normal at sea level, it's 96%. If you're at altitude, it's 93%. I was at 72%, and I was wondering why I couldn't move. I was fatigued. I was sick. My headache, and then I was starting to cough like there's no tomorrow. And it took 7 hours to get to the closest medical facility. And even that, it was I don't know, it was 2 people, a doctor and a nurse. That's it. No, anyhow, they took care of me. So I have to be mindful of where I am, what the risks are in terms of the kinds of things I could experience, even as a normal individual.
Yeah.
Because it gets right, it gets accentuated because I have the problems I have, right? So I just do my homework. And I also communicate with people that says, listen, this is my situation. And if I start slowing down, or if I just want to stop, they respect that, because I've explained to them what's taking place. And sometimes when we're trekking, like when I was down in Patagonia, and there's a group of us, I just say, hey, I got to stop. And if you're coming back this way, then you can find me. And I just spend my 2 or 3 hours sitting back, looking at the clouds, looking at what's around me, and it's like, this isn't too bad. Slowness is good.
Is there any fear of, I don't know if fear is the right word, but with this stage 4 cancer, I mean, you could die at any moment, really. I mean, is there any fear of, being away from home or being on a trek or something and passing away?
Well, it's have you ever seen The Samurai with Tom Cruise?
Yes.
And okay. And that the samurai who actually passed on the battlefield, right? And just as he was passing, he saw visions of cherry blossoms, and his last words out of his mouth was perfect, right? Because he died on the battlefield. Well, for me, traveling's my battlefield. And if I die out there, it's like, there's not a better way to go. And I can say this because when I was down in Antarctica last year, I did capsize, right? And I found myself underneath the water, and thinking, is this how it goes? Is this how I die? And my reaction was, well, it won't be so bad. That'd be a great story, a great thing to put on your gravestone. Died while he was out, doing what he loved. So no, I'm not fearful of that, right? I'm not fearful of that. I'd rather die that way than be in a freaking hospital, right? With all kinds of tubes and being prolonged for an indefinite period of time. So no, it's not a worry. But I also, I'm not looking to it. I also am doing all the mitigation I need to be doing from a risk perspective so that I won't. But that's not a reason for me not to go.
Gotcha. So you're prepared. You're, like you said, you're a planner. You still plan. You still prepare for what you can do. If you need to stop, you stop. If you need, so you're taking the right precautions. You're not just out there, with a death wish and wanting to,
No, and that's why I've also changed my traveling in terms of I now do. Have you ever heard of expedition traveling?
A little bit.
Yeah. It's been going on for years. There's a couple of entities out there like Quark and Aurora that specialize in this, right? Where you can go to any remote part of the world and they'll take you there. But it's not like a guided tour. It's a real expedition where we plan out where we're going and what we expect to see from a fauna, from a wildlife, we're in remote places where there's nobody else, so you have to really get geared up, and you have to have, you're tied off if you're on glaciers, or if you're, I kayak all the time, so I'm just kayaking all these places. But there's a real purpose to it. Today we're going to try and see if we can find, chinstrap penguins, right? Or whatever it happens to be. And why I love it is because every day is a physical challenge. But every night I go back to the same bed that I was in the night before. I know exactly where my clothes are, right? And it's not like I have to pack and unpack every single day as we move from point to point. Nor am I carrying a backpack full of equipment, clothes, etc., as I'm going from point to point. So during the daytime, I can be really active, pushing the envelope, and then at night I know I'm okay. And then if I don't feel I can do it, I don't go out. I just stay in the ship, right? And we still move from one place to the other, so progress is still going on. And so I do a good job of communicating with people, especially the guides, the expedition leaders, to let them know, my condition, and some days are going to be good and some days may not be good.
Good way to look at it. I've noticed one thing. I'm just in our little bit of time that we've chatted here. I've noticed for you, it's a lot about kind of embracing the moment, kind of the present moment. In light of your cancer diagnosis, I mean, how do you still embrace that present moment while confronting the realities of, having this cancer?
Well, in reality, that's all I have. I only have the moment because it's terminal. So tomorrow's not guaranteed. I know this all sounds so cliche-ish, doesn't it? But for me, it's my life, where I have no idea what's happening next week, right? I have no idea in 2 months or a year from now. And so I need to embrace as much as I can. I have a lot to do. I have a lot of things I want to do, and I have things I want to see. And so being in the moment is so important. And that also helps me when am having those points of fatigue, when I am having those down points. Like I gave the example of hiking in Patagonia, where I just couldn't hike anymore. I had to stop. Well, being in the moment allows you to do that without regret, right? I can sit here and not be ashamed at, you guys are all hiking away and I'm sitting here having to suck it up. Yeah, well, while you were off doing this thing, I sat here and I saw an eagle come and do a dive bomb down and pull up some fish out of the lake, right? While I was here, I saw a puma that we don't normally see because we make up too much noise in the back over here. And so in my resting, I'm still experiencing a lot because my focus, both from a hearing, sight, smell, is attuned to being in the moment. And so, yeah, and it's been great. I've always a guy who was trying to before just get through the moment because it was about the journey. It's about not the journey. It's about the destination. I need to reach the summit, and we only have 2 more hours left. So no diddly dallying, right? We got to get going. Now that's not the issue anymore. It's about mileage. It's not about peaks. It's not about summits. It's about experiences.
That's the thing I like to say on my show. It's not about the destination as it is about the journey, and I think the journey's such a huge part of it.
Well, it is the part of it. I mean, why do you do it, right? I mean, yeah, you're going to stand on the summit, but we all know that standing on the summit is maybe anywhere from 5 minutes, depending on the cold, to maybe a few hours. But it's taken you months to get there in terms of preparation, the actual hike, whatever. And if it's real challenging, it's going to take you months. And if you aren't focused on the journey, you're missing a lot.
Well,
right?
yeah. And you said you're a planner. So planning, that's one of my favorite things. I love the planning of it because it does something else for me as well. It brings up anticipation. What about anticipation? Now, what's the anticipation like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting you said that because for me in the planning part, I get to visualize what it is that I want to go off and try to do. Right, I do my homework, create perspectives, and then you're right. It's like, okay, I'm chomping at the bit. When I get in the plane, it's like, yeah, can we just get there? And so the anticipation buildup is important. Now, what's interesting though is that sometimes anticipation and high expectations, if they're not met, makes the experience that much less. And so I don't correlate the anticipation with an expectation level because I've had too many times where it was a different experience than what I expected. And that shouldn't be detracting from that experience. And so if you've got this thing in your head, well, wait a minute, I was supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z. That's not happening. This sucks. Excuse my language. Right? And it's like, well, no, that's all part of the trip. Right? That's why I said in adventures, when things start going haywire and you got to be thinking differently. Well, if you've got a problem, you got to do something differently. That's part of the journey, right? And your anticipation up to that point just got you prepared so that you can then really embrace the next part of that journey.
Great way to say it. I like that. And I like the fact, yeah, the anticipation of it shouldn't really be what you really experienced. That's a great way to look at it. You're opening my eyes to some things here. This is why I love doing this.
Well,
because
good.
I learned so
Well,
much
good.
from my guests, which is amazing. All right, you've explored some pretty wild places. You talked about expedition traveling. You've mentioned Antarctica a few times. Remote places. You've gone to like a lot of remote places. What draws you to these kind of wild, rugged environments?
Well, I've got two answers for you. I'll give you the practical answer in terms of why I even embraced it in the first. So back in '96, remember when I talked about having this epiphany about I need to travel? Well, part of that epiphany was I realized that in order for me to really recharge my batteries, I had to go away for 2 weeks and not be bothered with work. All right. And even in '96, we didn't have cell phones yet. I always went to places where I was only a phone call away or an email away. And I'm not making this up. I've had times when, because on a proposal for some work, the team is sent a helicopter to pick me up to bring me into to the proposal and presentation and such, right? And I said, yeah, I got to find a place where not only can they not reach me in terms of a telephone or an email, but they can't reach me with a friggin' helicopter or any other thing, right? It's going to be a real pain in the ass for them to come. So I started thinking about remote places. And then those remote places got deeper and deeper remote because as the technology changed and cell phones and satellite phones, it's like, where can I actually go now? And that's what caused me to go further and further. I've been to the Yukon and I've kayaked rivers up there. I've been to Alaska both wintertime and summertime. Helicopter skiing, rafting down. I don't know how to say this, but when you're the only person out there, there's a different feel to it, right? You are your only survival, and if something goes wrong, you can't just scream out, "Hey, another camper, a little about the thing. Come on, I got a little problem." It's like you're SOL, And I do a lot of my traveling solo, or at least I used to up until 2024. And so for me, it was the challenge of how do you recover when you have a problem. Yeah, this is no different than how I described it earlier about an adventure versus travel.
Sure.
I guess that's my psyche. I love challenges. I like MacGyvering things. I like, trying to, as they say, get water from a stone.
That's how you do it. I love it. Has there maybe give me an example of a place that you've been that's really was like maybe transformative for you? Is there a certain story you could tell me or an experience?
Well, we talked earlier about being in the moment, right? And I said I wasn't always that way. And so about 4 or 5 years ago, I was I was traveling it was wintertime, and I was in North Cascade Mountains. I was in a North Cascade National Park, and it began to snow. Or no, it wasn't snowing yet. I was off, I was doing off roading, right? And I wanted to get a position because it was supposed to be a beautiful vista in this one particular area. At least the locals had told me about it. And so I was trying to get positioned up there, and I did get positioned up there for a beautiful sunset, right? And when I got up there, and it was, the sunset was beautiful, and then I went to bed. But the next morning when I woke up, there were 6 inches of snow all around me, and I couldn't go back down the road because it was too steep. And I had a trailer that I was pulling. That was actually my Jeep. I have a camper on the truck, and then I tow my Jeep so I can go off exploring. And I couldn't go down, so I just sat there for 3 days. And there's only so much you can do. And I finally said, I'm going to go out, even though it's snowing and stuff like that. I'm not going to go too far away from the truck because I didn't want to get hurt. And I sat down and underneath a pine tree, right? You know, the tree boughs. If you're smart, you can go underneath one that's got lots of pine branches, and the snow is not as deep down there. So I found myself a spot where I can sit, watch it snow because it wasn't snowing that bad anymore. And I sat there for a few hours. And while I was sitting there, I saw a snow hare, right, as it comes bouncing around. I saw a coyote that was trying to, it was mousing, right? So, you'd be going along, all of a sudden you jump in the air and go, boom, straight down into the snow, and then come up with a friggin' little vole or a mouse. I have no idea, but it had something in its mouth. And I just sat there and I said, wow, all this stuff's going on. And I never really experienced that because I'm always making noise. When you're skiing outside or you're backcountry, you're making noise and stuff like that just naturally through the skiing. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So that was for me, it was transformative in terms of coming to realize that slowing down wasn't a bad thing. It was a fucking great thing, right? And so that was for me when I realized I needed to be spending more time in the moment. But that was also before I got my stage 4 cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Well, this is where a place you got to be spending a lot of time.
There's a little prequel. It kind of forced your hand a little bit with the whole cancer diagnosis, but I like the fact that it was something that you were kind of forced to do because you couldn't really go anywhere, so you were stuck. But it allowed you to realize, hey, this is good. This is good to just take these moments. Watch the little hare. Watch the coyote. I mean, amazing.
Then that goes back to my point, Jake, in terms of, most people when they have a problem, that's when they start packing up to leave, right? Saying, okay, this is a sign. I shouldn't be out here. I should be, it's all right. Well, and they'll be frustrated. Spend a few more minutes before you draw that conclusion about packing things up to say, well, how bad is it really? I mean, did you cut your arm? I mean, how bad is it? And can you recover from it? And then if you start thinking about recovering, then you get into a whole different mindset. Not that I go searching problems, but I don't need too much of a problem for it to turn into this is going to be an experience.
Great way to look at it. One thing I love about you, Thom, what you do is you're a great storyteller, and you've put a lot of this into actual books. You've authored quite a few books, including one called Living While Dying, I think is the name of one of them, which is about this whole experience with the cancer and all that.
Yep.
You also have one, and I want to ask about this as far as, deal with rugged environments. Yeah, what's with you in the cold? What's with you in like winter, and why do you love it so much? It just, I enjoy a good winter for a little bit, but not, for a day.
Yeah. It's a mindset thing. And for me, I love the winter because there's no one else out there, right? I remember a number of years ago, it was February, I'm standing at the base of Mount Rushmore, right? Now, normally, there's hundreds of people around here, right? You can't find a spot to get a picture or whatever. There was nobody there. It was me and the boys, and it was snowing. Okay. And so, I don't know who has the big nose. I don't know if it's Jefferson or not, but someone's nose was collecting snow on it. Right. And I'm going, whoa, that's beautiful. Right. Or if you ever been to Bryce Canyon, Bryce National Park?
I've been to Bryce. Yes.
Have you been there?
Yes.
Hey, have you been there in the wintertime?
I have not. No.
All those hoodoos, right? Covered with snow. Talk about a change in complexion. It's stunning. Or if you've ever seen Old Faithful in Yellowstone, right? In the summertime. In the wintertime, wholly different in the sense of hardly anybody there, but all the steam coming up, right? It's just gorgeous. And you look around and you see the bison that are there, and they're all covered in ice and snow, and they're enjoying what they're doing because they've got some areas where it's warmer, so the grass is popping up and they can eat it, right? But it's like, yeah, this is the way it's supposed to be, and there's no fighting for campsites. There's no waiting in line if you're into that thing, right? So for me, it's a time when there's less people out there. The second thing is, and this is something my daughter. I mean, we had a rule in our house: cotton kills, right? Don't wear cotton in the wintertime, right? Cotton kills because you get sweat and you've got next year. You're forever warming up the shirt and you're losing all your heat. Anyhow, my daughter finally concluded that there's no such thing as bad weather. It's poor choice of clothes. And she's right. right? I mean, let's face it, you can always put another layer on. But when you're naked and it's still hot out, what are you going to do? And so
Can't go,
I don't like,
can't go much
I'm a
less than
big
that, right?
guy. Pardon?
You can't
There's
go
nothing,
much
that's
less
right.
than that.
Yeah. So I don't like the heat. And so for me, the cold, and you're right. I wrote a book about embracing the cold because I know that people don't like the cold. And I was trying to give them tips on how to enjoy it more because Mother Nature in the wintertime is as stunning as she is in the summertime. Right? You just got to be out there to experience it.
I love that. That's a great way to look at it. Let's stay on the same topic then about your storytelling, your books that you've written. Why write books? What is it that you find about writing that you love so much?
Well, it started off a different. When I retired at 55, I mentioned that I wanted to do things that focused on my right brain, not my left. Right? Because I've been spending my entire career on my left brain, and so I wanted to be creative. That's why I did the woodworking. But I hadn't started writing yet. But that was going to come. But I was focused on being creative. In 2015, when I found out that I had cancer, I went to find out. All right, well, what does it mean? And there are tons of books out there about, medically what you're supposed to do, the prognosis, what kind of treatments, right? I said, yeah, okay. Well, my doctor's going to tell me all that stuff. So, okay, that's good. But I want to know what it felt like. I mean, what am I in store for? You know, I've sprained ankles, I've broken legs. I know, duration of time to heal and stuff like that, right? What you got to do. I had no clue about cancer, and so I tried looking for books that gave from a from a man's perspective on what it's like to deal with it. Unfortunately, this particular cancer does more than just impact your health. I mean, it impacts your libido. I mean, things that are very important to guys now come under question. It's like, okay, your manliness has gone out the door. And I wanted to know and understand if that was true and if it was recoverable. And there weren't any books on that. And I said, well, maybe someone should write a book about that. And I did in 24. That's when I released my first book. I wrote it in 23 because of that fact. And then as I started writing, I realized I really enjoy this. There's something to be said about sitting at you're not for work in terms of sitting on your computer, because we all do that, but to be able to get some things out of here onto a piece of paper that others may find helpful. That's what led me to doing the website where I got tons of blogs. I have a blog that I do. And I found it to be therapeutic for myself. And so it's helped me navigate this journey because I can articulate some of the challenges I'm feeling or experiencing, right? And just get it out. And sometimes when you have bad days, instead of walking around like, the world sucks, I will spend the time writing about it, get it out of my system, and I can go back to being positive, right? Because I acknowledged it, I named it, and I got it out of my system. That's pretty good. So it's therapy for me as well. And then the last part is legacy. Everyone wants to leave something behind. And I don't want to be remembered as the guy that had cancer and just stuck on the bed or the couch or something like that and just withered away. Yeah, he had cancer, but he's still doing shit.
Still doing it, still making it happen. So you started writing just 2023? Was that when you first started writing?
No, no, no. I started writing a lot earlier for different reason, though. Unfortunately, I suffer from clinical depression. And so my therapist said, you ought to think about doing some journaling. I said, yeah, right. That's exactly what I'm going to do. But he said, no, 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 you really should. So I started. I said, okay, like any other guy, my first day of journal, today was a good day, period. And the next day was, oh yeah, it was even better, exclamation point. It's like, okay, I don't know what this is doing, but this is not like, I don't think what he intended. But as I started, I've got discipline. So when I put my mind to do something, I usually follow through. And so I said, oh, listen, for the next 3 months, I'm just going to every day write something down. And if I get something out of it after 3 months, great. If I don't, I'll just stop it, right? What's 15 minutes a day? Well, after 3 months, my journals went from one line to multiple pages, right? And that's when I started realizing, wait a minute, I can get rid of a lot of this negativity in my system by just articulating it, naming it, right? Pointing to it, and then putting into a book, and then putting the book on a shelf. And it's no longer in my system. And so when I decided to write the book, I said, holy Toledo, I've got, you know, so 23 is when I started to write the book. I started doing these things back in 2012. So I had 13 years, 12 years of, or 10 years at least, of already writing. So it was more of, and if you notice in the first book, it's really a journal that I've just extracted from. So, and I said, all right, this is easy.
And so it was the first book, Living While Dying. Is that the first book? What's the first book? Okay. Yeah. Tell us. Okay. So that's that one. What are the other books? If you don't mind, just kind of a quick, the name of them and kind of what they're about.
So the Living While Dying was pretty much the period between getting diagnosed in 2015 to getting actually determined to be stage 4, right? And all about the emotional, all the bullshit associated with that. In 22, I decided to, I decided to do a 7-month journey going across the provinces of Canada up to Fairbanks, Alaska, and then all the way up to Prudhoe Bay in the wintertime. And when I came back from that, I decided, I want to write a book about how travel and this journey I on can meld together. And because I was positioning myself, because I was solo traveling, backcountry, off-roading, etc., there were instances where I had mechanical failures, etc., then I had to rely on myself. Just like when I have this cancer, I got to rely on myself, because in order for me to feel better, a lot of times it's going to be mentally, right? I've got to do something to find the joy. I've got to do something to change my attitude from a negative to a positive. And so if I can meet the challenges of the wintertime and still find pleasure and joy doing that, then that's going to hold me in good stead as I continue down this journey of dealing with the cancer. And that's the Chasing My Northern Lights was the second book, which is really a travel narrative of going, as I just said, Canada and all the way up to
Gotcha.
to Alaska.
Chasing My Northern Lights, that's what that one's called?
Yep.
Okay.
And then I wrote called Embracing the Cold, where I got a lot of questions. Well, why do you like the cold so much? And I said, well, here's some pointers, right?
Yeah.
And then I was writing poetry. I still do. And someone, my editor said, well, why don't you take some of that and just put it into a book? I said, all right, no one's going to read it. Yeah, get it out there. You'd be surprised. Well, no one's read it. I think I've sold one copy, and that was to me. And then the last book.
What's the book of poetry? What's it called?
Strength of Surrender.
Strength of Surrender. Okay.
Yeah, it's all about acceptance in terms of the challenge of accepting. Everyone thinks it's pretty straightforward, right? And it's not. When you accept the fact that when you accept terminal cancer, that means you're accepting mortality, and that's a big acceptance, right? Or the things that I learned that were most challenging for me, and that's what the last book, The Edge of Now, is about. It's about the challenges I faced in accepting all the things that go with having terminal illness. And it's also the time I was down in South America, so it was a travel, but more spiritual in terms of how do you deal with accepting, right? And so some things that very difficult for me was accepting help, right? I'm a guy, and I'm a provider, I'm a protector. I take those things seriously, protecting my girls. And asking for help is not part of the P's. It's not the P's, it's asking for help is not like that. And if you do, you're just looking like you're weak. And what guy wants to show weakness, right? What I learned is that asking for help is not a weakness, it's a strength. I also learned that by asking for help, I've created deeper and stronger connections with people. Because, it's one thing to stand up, and I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", 250. I'm a big guy, right? No emotion. And they're like, yeah, but when you start opening up and they're realizing, wait a minute, there is feeling in there. You do have some emotions. You aren't, you could be a nice guy. Changes the dynamics considerably. And other guys, when they see that, oh, okay, if you can say this, then I'm going to tell you about some of my stuff. And all of a sudden, you're sharing. Right? You're sharing. And the deep, I got one story. So for 20 years, I did these trips with this guy. Loved him dearly. But our conversations on these trips would last for 2 or 3 weeks. We're all about the strategy and tactics of what we were doing, right? And some of the stuff we're doing is pretty serious in terms of, going across glaciers and having to worry about crevasses and having to tie up and blah, blah, blah. We never talked about ourselves or the challenges in our life. And when I got the cancer part and had to stop doing the trips with him, our relationship stopped because we had nothing to talk about, right? 20 years. You would think that we'd know a little bit more about each other, and like, nope. That's guys. Unless you have a purpose, ball games,
Right.
sports, whatever it happens to be, everything's episodic we can talk about, but when it becomes emotional, we're gonna avoid that, right? So asking for help was very difficult for me, right? And just another part was uncertainty. My professional career, I was a risk manager, right? Not in terms of insurance and stuff like that. Operational risk, right? So companies are trying to mitigate the amount of operational risk they have. They want to put controls in, and that's where I come into play. So my whole career was around mitigating risk, eliminating uncertainty. And now I have to embrace uncertainty because I have no idea when I'm going to die. I have no idea what I'm going to look like. And I have to embrace that if I want to wake up the next morning and be active and be ready to take the day on, right? Those are so the last book, The Edge of Now, talks about what those different levels of acceptance were. And I got a bunch of stories about how it became a real point for me while I was traveling, right? And while I was experiencing life that way, I was also trying to experience it in a more spiritual way in terms of embracing the moment, everything we talked about, the stillness.
I want to kind of go back to your poetry just for a minute, because it's like I said, you sold one copy to yourself. Congratulations. Do you have any poems that you wrote that come to mind, like maybe something quick that maybe you could share with us? I wouldn't mind hearing a poem from you if you've got something that you could share with us.
All right. So here's one. This one is about time. And I'm only going to go through a couple of stanzas, right?
Sure. It's perfect.
So the measure of time. In the waning hours of a borrowed dawn, time whispers softly, a fleeting song, once boundless and wide, now a precious thread, spun from the moments that lie ahead. Where once it stretched as far as you could see, now counts each breath with stark urgency. A river that once roared wild and free flows gently toward the end's decree. So it's about experiencing life in a different way, where I used to have, I didn't even think about what the end looked like, right? It was just like, all I knew was I got a lot to do, boundless, right? Like a river, it just keeps on going forever, right? I'm gonna ride this thing as wild as it gets, and then after a while, you got to realize, no, you gotta just. You may only be able to go down a mile of this river, and it's not going to be the white water you hoped, right? It's going to be flat water. Well, you still gotta enjoy it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I have a yeah.
I love that. I love that. And thank you for sharing that. And I really, when you were sharing that, I was like, wow, this is just so, it's you, it's like kind of what you've gone through and kind of what you've talked about through this whole podcast episode. So I think that was beautiful. I think that's awesome. I might be purchaser number 2 of your book of poetry.
Well, good.
we'll have to see on that. That's great. I appreciate you sharing that. So for you, Thom, knowing that, you've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, you're not sure, but you are a planner, which I love. And I think you said you're going to Iceland in a month or so. Any other plans you got on the table?
Well, here, so this is good. Yesterday, I had my semi-annual blood work done, right, to find out how things are going, and I found out that I'm doing great. That the whatever the indicators are, I don't need to go into the technical stuff, are better than what they should be, right? Which means I have at least another year, right? Even under worst case scenarios, I have another year. So yesterday I started planning my next adventure. I'm excited. I didn't know what was going to happen in 26. I thought 26 was going to be literally a dead year. Ha ha, bad pun. And now I know it's not. And so I have yet to, there's one continent I haven't been to, and that is Africa. 26 will see me doing some travels there, whether it's a safari or whether it's heading up to Morocco. I don't know yet. But That's it, or either that, or there's something that's I've always it's a bucket list item for me, is circumnavigate on the interior Australia. I'd love to do that. I just don't know if I have the strength to be able to pull off some of the feats in terms of in case there are mechanical issues. That's one of the downsides. I don't have the same strength I used to, and therefore I can be mindful of that. But aside from that, in this trip we're taking in next month, a lot of it's going to be kayak. So I'll be kayaking off the coast of Iceland, Greenland, and all up through Baffin area and the southwest, the Northwest Passage. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm hoping that I get close enough, but yet far enough away from a polar bear, so I can add that to my wildlife that I've seen.
Absolutely. So you said, first of all, congrats that your blood work's looking better. Do you think in your mind, I mean, I'm thinking this in my mind, that there's any correlation to the fact that you're out being adventurous, that it's helped in any way? And I'm not speaking medically or anything, but
well, you believe it or not, there is some studies out there that say travel is good if you have it, but for mental reasons, it doesn't change the condition, right? For instance, the fact that if you can tick off some bucket list items for people, right? That's powerful, because that's one thing they'll regret not doing, because they're focused on that. For me, just being outside of my home with different types of people, that means a lot to me, right? Being positive, a positive mindset has incredible benefits to health. So, for me, I'm going to continue down this path of positivity. I'm going to continue down this path of embracing life and all the challenges it has in front of me. I'm waking up each day with gratitude for having the day. And I think for me, I think as for most people, you are at your best when you're living with purpose and living with intention.
Absolutely.
Until yesterday, I was worried what my purpose was going to be, right? In terms of, all right, am I in the downward slope, right? And my purpose is I'm not going to be able to do podcasts as much anymore. I'm not going to be able to write, and therefore that's coming off my thing. And what am I going to replace it with to keep me energized? Now I know my purpose is the same, right? And that's good. And now I can deal with the intentions of being able to move forward. So those are important. Being positive.
Love it. This has been amazing for me. I really appreciate your time today. This has been fascinating, learning about who you are. I love the fact that you're just so much about, embracing winter and embracing the cold and being alone and, just embracing the moment. I think it's awesome. For someone listening who might be a little fearful, maybe a little uncertain about chasing their own adventures or, embracing life, what would you say to them? What would be a little piece of advice you'd give to them?
It doesn't need to be grand. All right. It doesn't need to be grand. You don't need to go to Antarctica. You don't need to go out to the polar regions, right? I mean, I live on the Cape, right? And so I have the benefit of being able to see sunsets and sunrises on the water, depending on what side of the Cape I am. And so if you lived here, right, and in your own, wherever you live, there's probably great places to see sunrises or sunsets. Go off and do that, right? Go for a walk in some nature park, and then and do it with purpose. There's a term I never really appreciated, but now it makes a lot of sense to me. There's kind of like there's three different speeds of walking, right? You got the truckers out there who's like, all right, they're for a purpose, and you have the people out there like dog walkers, right? Well, I think they got to go as fast as their dog's going, right? And then there's bird walkers. I'm a bird walker, right? Where I don't walk very fast. It's not because I'm birding, because I'm not. A bird walker goes very slow because they're trying to see what's in the trees, forcing them to slow down. So my advice to people, go out in the wilderness, go out to your natural, your local park, and be a bird walker. Go slow, look around you, enjoy the moment.
Be a bird walker. I love it. Thom, thank you so much for coming on Journey with Jake.
Hey, my pleasure, Jake, and thank you so much for having me.
A huge thank you to Thom Barrett for sharing his incredible story, his strength, and his message of living fully, no matter the circumstances. If you'd like to learn more about Thom, be sure to visit livinglifewhiledying.com or connect with him on Instagram at Thom_Barrett. And Thom is spelled Thom, Barrett, Barre. TT. And to you, my amazing listeners, thank you for being here. Your support means everything. If Tom's story touched you, I'd love to hear about your own adventures or moments that have shaped you. Send me an email at jake@journeywithjake.net or shoot me a message on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast. Don't forget to share Journey with Jake with a friend. It's the best way to spread these powerful stories. And be sure to join me next week for another unforgettable episode with Rand Timmerman. Rand and his brother hiked the Appalachian Trail, both in their 70s, discovering healing, connection, and spiritual growth every step of the way. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, it's not always about the destination, as it is about the journey. Take care, everybody.